In this video, we're going to show you how to install the inner tie rod end on your Ford 500. The process for the driver's side is the same as the passenger side. Now, if you have a hubcap, go ahead and give that a gentle tug outward, pop that off and set it aside. Using your 19mm socket, loosen and remove the 5 lug nuts. Grab your wheel, pull it off, and set it aside. Using a 21mm wrench, we want to loosen this jam nut. And we did soak this in some rust penetrant. Use a 13mm wrench on the inner tie rod here to hold that. And just loosen that down a couple threads. The outer tie rod end nut here is a 21mm. So you're going to use your wrench here, and let's loosen that. You can see that our ball joint is spinning with it. Use a 3/8 wrench. I'm going to use a stubby one here. Tap this on. Once we have the wrench tapped on there, I'm just going to spin this around until it stops on the knuckle. And let's loosen this nut. So our 3/8 inch wrench kept popping off of the top here. We use a set of locking pliers here to do the same job. We're not damaging any threads. It's just holding the top end of that ball joint. Now the nut's ready to come off. Be careful if you did use heat to loosen that up. Make sure you're wearing some sort of protective glove. Pull it off, set it aside. When removing the outer tie rod, count the revolutions it takes to remove it. Makes it easier when we install our new part. That'll give us a preliminary wheel alignment before we can get down to the shop and have the real alignment done. Now I'm going to take a crayon here and I'm just going to put a small 23. You do not have to do this. However, it makes it a lot easier if you happen to step away or get called away for any reason. You come back, you'll know that it was 23 turn to put it back on. Using a 21mm wrench, want to loosen the jam nut. Now, if you have more efficient tools, like an impact gun, you can use a 21mm socket. Zip that right off. Now, on the inner tie rod here, we have this bellows boot, and there's a clamp on the end here. I'm going to use a pair of pliers. Just open up this clamp. I'm just going to pop that open and slide that off. Now on the inside of our bellows boot, there's a metal band. Now that band is a one-time use. We do have to break that to get it off so we can remove our bellows boot. Now we're going to use this tool here that has a little notch in it, and that notch will fit right onto that clamp. You want to be careful not to damage the boot if you do not have a replacement. Now the metal band itself does have a main piece of it that is sticking out, and it's where the band loop is latched together. So that's where you want to put your tool. I'm going to just tap that. Once you get that band off, simply grab the bellows, pop that, and just give it a few good tugs. After a couple of good tugs there, you can slide this off. Don't forget to reach inside, remove that band. Now our plan is to reuse our boot here. So you want to go ahead and flex this, look for any splits or tears. This boot is in good reusable condition, so we're just going to clean this up and set that aside. Now I want to unthread our inner tie rod from the rack shaft itself. You can use an inner tie rod tool or a large set of pliers like so. It doesn't take much. Again, wipe off the outer portion of the rack shaft here. You also want to inspect the inside of the rack itself, where the rack shaft or the rack gear comes in and out of. If you see a bunch of power steering fluid or anything leaking out of here, you do have a rack issue. You want to go ahead and address that situation sooner than later. Ours is in decent condition, so we can go ahead and install our new inner tie rod. I'm going to take our inner tie rod and thread that on. Now we installed our tie rod tool here. It gives us the availability to use a 3/8 drive torque wrench. I want to go ahead and tighten this down to 80 foot-pounds. Before we install our bellows boot, we want to add some grease to the pivot point here. What you can do is pack some grease in here. What we want to do is pack this grease in here, work this around a little bit. Take the bellows boot, slide that up and on. Now the boot itself will pop into this little notch that is on the inner tie rod here, but this won't reach the steering rack. What you want to do now, go to the passenger side, and we're going to turn the wheel the opposite way. That's going to suck the outer tie rod into the rack. That's going to allow this boot the ability to pop on there nice and easy. Now from the passenger side, go ahead and grab that wheel, rotate it, and you can see that inner tie rod going in. Just enough so we can slide that boot onto the rack. Pop it into place and go back to the passenger side. Stretch out a little bit. Now our next step is we want to use a new tie strap. We're going to use one of these here. Unless you have a metal band, you could reinstall onto that or install onto it. But what we're going to do is take our plastic tie, create a loop, slide this over, get it to the inner portion here. Once we have that snug down a little bit by hand, we're going to grab some pliers. Tighten that up a little bit. Once you have that on there good and snug, use your cutters, snip off the excess. Install our little band. We're going to install our jam nut. Install your outer tie rod. We're going to thread it on the 23 threads that we used to remove the old one. Once you have that on your 23rd count, you can spin that jam nut down and just kind of snug it up to it. I'm going to give this a couple of bumps. I'm going to go ahead and line this up with our knuckle and slide this into place. Good, slide this over. Fit that up into the knuckle. And install the nut. Now we're using a 10mm socket on the top of the ball joint, and we're going to use our 21mm wrench. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down. Now we can use our socket and our torque wrench. And you want to torque this down to 85 foot-pounds. Now you want to tighten down your jam nut. You want this to be nice and tight. Using a pair of pliers, and then grab our outer tie rod. And I'm just going to twist this. I want my outer tie rod here to be level, not twisted, rocking back and forth, but nice and level. Once that's straight, go ahead and install your wheel and bring the vehicle down to your local alignment shop. Go ahead and line up the wheel with the lug nuts. Install all of the lug nuts by hand first, or at least get them started a few threads. Once these are all started, we'll go ahead and snug them down. Using your torque wrench, go ahead and torque the lug nuts down to 95 foot-pounds. Now when installing the hubcap here, you want to go ahead and make sure that the little notch lines up with the valve stem. And you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.